I used to believe that loyalty alone could make someone stay, that if I worked hard enough, stayed patient, and knew when to step back, people would eventually recognize my true worth. But no one ever warned me that patience itself could turn into the floor people walk over without ever looking down. My name is Cindy Crawford, not the model, just a regular woman working in the creative media industry, where everything has to be beautiful, fast, emotional, even when it's built on lies. I was once the content director at a mid-sized agency in Chicago, a place I thought I had built something lasting with my colleagues, a place where I had contributed more than anyone to the biggest campaign in their history, the one that skyrocketed the agency's name after just one award season. That campaign wasn't anyone else's. It was my brainchild, raised over 8 relentless months. From the first concept to the final line of copy, I had spent more nights at the office than at home, memorized every data point about our target audiences, convinced that if I delivered excellence, I would be recognized. The person I trusted most was Casey Brennan, the executive director, my closest friend through 7 years of working together. Casey was the one who had brought me over from my old agency, who sat for hours listening to me talk about emotional marketing, about campaigns that touched hearts rather than just chasing numbers. We used to dream of starting our own company, promised we would never sell our souls for cheap contracts, and hugged each other in tears when the agency won its first major award. But everything changed last spring when a major tech client selected our agency for their global rebranding campaign. I was the one who designed the strategy, but Casey was the one who stood in front of the media. At first, I thought it was normal. I was always the person behind the curtain. Then came the first article, and I didn't see my name anywhere. Then the second, then the third. Gradually, Casey became the creative brain, the visionary behind the campaign that redefined emotional storytelling. I tried to swallow that feeling. I told myself it was just an oversight, until the internal meeting, when the official credits were sent out. My name wasn't on the list. I stayed silent through the meeting, hands clenched tightly under the table, like letting go might cause something inside me to fall apart. Afterward, I confronted Casey and asked her why. She just looked at me, and her eyes were no longer those of the friend who had once cried and laughed with me in our early days. Cindy, you're talented, but you're not the face of the brand. You don't sell an image. In my position, I have to do what's best for the company. Her voice was calm, almost like she was explaining something obvious. I stared at her for a long moment, then turned away without a word. That night, I sat alone in the office, the coffee beside me gone cold, the light casting shadows on the bare cement floor. And I realized I had just been betrayed not with a knife, but with the slow erasure of my work, as if it were nothing. I submitted my resignation a week later. No one tried to stop me. Casey even offered a polite hug and said maybe I needed time to explore new opportunities. I walked out of that agency with a cardboard box holding a few folders, a small trophy with Casey's name engraved on it, and a wound no one could see. My mother didn't understand why I quit a stable job. She called me ungrateful, said Casey had done a lot for me. My friends hesitated. No one said it directly, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Maybe I was just blaming others instead of facing my own flaws. And then the worst happened. I ran out of money. All my savings had gone into helping my younger brother open a small coffee shop in the suburbs, a place no one had visited since the pandemic passed. I moved back in with my mother to cut costs, waking up early every morning to make coffee with nowhere to go. I felt like an extra in my own life. One rainy night, I was scrolling through LinkedIn and saw a post from Casey. Her company had just been named Agency of the Year. There she was, standing on stage with the golden trophy in her hands. Her post hashtagged "Jerk Revenge Through Success." I put my phone down, and my hand trembled not from anger, but because for the first time in my life, I felt truly invisible. I had always believed that if I were good enough, the truth would speak for itself, but no one hears the truth if you don't stand up. Sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the rain pooling outside the window, I knew I had hit rock bottom, and maybe, just maybe, that was the only place I could truly begin again. Not everyone knows what it feels like to pull yourself up when no one around you believes you can. Every morning, I woke up in my mother's old house, surrounded by the static of the morning news on the radio and the sound of coffee dripping in the kitchen. I felt like I was 16 again, lost in the question of what to do with my life. But this time, it wasn't a beginning filled with hope. It was a beginning no one was waiting for. I spent hours by the window, watching the light filter through the trees in Chicago and wondering whether I still had the strength to start over. One afternoon, a message arrived from Niles Harper, an old colleague from another agency. We were never close, but he had always been decent, quiet, and had a talent for sensing trends before they hit. The message was short. He said he was building an independent project and wanted to meet if I was willing. I agreed almost immediately, not out of hope, but because I needed a reason to leave the couch. We met at a small cafe in Logan Square, once a favorite spot for creatives. Niles was already there, an espresso steaming in front of him. He handed me a rough draft of a marketing strategy. Explaining it was the first step in a startup he and a small group were trying to build, a platform to connect independent artists with brands in need of emotionally driven content. We don't have much money, Cindy, but I believe you understand what emotional marketing really means, he said, his eyes steady. The draft was scattered, the ideas raw and unshaped, but I recognized something real beneath the surface, something unfinished, but sincere. I nodded without setting any conditions. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge or rebuilding a reputation. I just wanted to do something I used to be good at. I started working every day from my old bedroom, on a laptop that was barely running. With spotty Wi-Fi, I rewrote the entire strategy for Niles, from the service packages to the narrative approach for different types of brands. No one knew. No one praised me, but when I sent him the first full draft, Niles replied, "For the first time, this feels like a plan with soul." That was enough to keep me up until 2 a.m. every night without regret. We called the platform SoulSync. It sounded dreamy, but for me, it was a quiet reminder that not everything meaningful has to be loud. I told no one except my younger brother. And for the next 3 months, while people thought I was unemployed, the truth was I was crafting email pitches, teaching myself SEO, designing landing pages, calling potential partners, facing rejection without explanation or even acknowledgement. Some days I nearly gave up, staring at my near-empty account while my mother reminded me, once again, that maybe it was time I settled down and got married. But then a small client from the indie publishing world called back and told me the way I had described their brand felt like every word understood the reader's feelings. For the first time in months, I smiled for real when I heard that. It was a tiny contract, barely a few $100s, but it was a start. Then came a boutique coffee shop, then a local skincare label. Each small project was treated with the same care as if it were $1 million brand. I didn't build SoulSync like a tech company. I built it like a story, a quiet reclaiming of worth by someone who had been betrayed, but still knew how to create something that mattered. I still remember one night in September. I was typing under the desk lamp when an email arrived from a fragrance brand that had just showcased at New York Fashion Week. They said they had read one of my blog posts on a small publishing site and wanted to collaborate because your storytelling doesn't shout, but it makes people stop and feel. I reread that email at least 3 times, unsure if I should believe it. After everything, someone had seen me, not because I tried to be seen, but because I stayed honest. I accepted the offer without negotiating the fee. All I asked was for my name to be credited at the bottom of the campaign, and they agreed. It was still only the beginning, but I felt different. I no longer waited for recognition. I wrote as if there was nothing left to lose. I taught myself how to edit short videos, how to build authentic content for social media, how to design series that felt both personal and shareable. At first, each post got only a few dozen views, but slowly, the numbers climbed. I once posted a short clip describing how I was pushed out of my old company right after delivering their most successful project, and that video hit 100,000 views in a week, not because of scandal, but because everyone has carried that same pain in some shape. I didn't need to take revenge on anyone. I was taking revenge through success, a kind of success that was quiet but deep enough to silence every doubt cast on me. Then, in an online meeting with a new client, I happened to scan through their partner list and saw a name I hadn't expected, Brennan & Co. It was Casey's agency. I said nothing. I simply made a note. I could feel the circle starting to close, and I knew I still had so much more to do. The first shift I noticed wasn't in the work itself, but in the way people who once knew me began to look at me differently. One late afternoon in early November, as I was finalizing slides for an upcoming pitch, I received a message from Niles. "Cindy, are you free tomorrow afternoon? I think you should be present at the pitching session with the brand team from Claritin Studio." I don't even remember nodding, only that, later that evening, I stayed up rehearsing each segment, each supporting example, even though I wasn't the lead presenter. The next morning, I arrived early and took a quiet seat in the corner of a conference room on the 14th floor of a high-rise in River North. When the door opened, I never expected the person walking in to be Casey Brennan. She came with a man I didn't recognize, laptop in hand, carrying that same familiar confidence. They sat directly across from me without looking my way. Casey either didn't recognize me, or she did and chose not to show it. But I didn't need to look twice. I knew I was sitting at a crossroads I hadn't seen coming. The Claritin representative introduced each team, and when it came to me, their voice paused for a second. "This is Cindy Crawford, in charge of content strategy for SoulSync." I nodded, shook hands, said nothing more. Then for the next 20 minutes, I laid out how our team approached emotional marketing, turning a forgotten brand into something that could reconnect with consumers through experience rather than trend. Everyone listened carefully except Casey. She didn't take notes, didn't look up, just tightened her grip on her pen. When the session ended, Claritin said they would need time to consider. A week later, the decision came in. SoulSync was selected, with the explanation that we captured genuine emotion without relying on gimmicks. I said nothing during our celebration meeting, just stared at my name on the signed proposal. A major campaign had slipped from Casey's hands, not because I had tried to win, but because we had done the work honestly and well, and that was only the beginning. Weeks later, a post circulated on an industry platform highlighting rising agencies. SoulSync made the list, alongside a note about a small team driven by empathy and substance that is convincing brands who no longer trust big agencies. I didn't write that article. I didn't know who submitted the info, but days later, a former colleague messaged me, "Casey is losing clients. people are starting to question why her recent campaigns feel like hollow replicas of the old ones. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clarity. Without me, Casey had no roots to draw from. She was good at delivering, but she wasn't the one who could shape a story with real depth. I remained silent, posted nothing provocative, never hinted at the past. I focused on growing SoulSync. Each project was shared among the team. Every piece of content went through careful review. I didn't want to repeat the old mistake where one person claimed the credit while another was pushed aside. But then something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a small panel discussion titled Rebuilding in Creative Industries After the Pandemic. I almost declined, but Niles urged me to go. Not everyone gets to share a comeback story like yours. He said. I agreed. That evening, dressed in a simple suit, I stepped onto a small stage in a room that held no more than 50 seats. I spoke about the fall no one saw, about the betrayal by someone I had trusted most, about how $1 million campaign had been stripped from me because I didn't know how to smile for the cameras at the right time. I named no one. No agencies were mentioned. But as I stepped off stage, the host leaned over and whispered, Casey also requested to speak at next month's talk show. That might be a bit harder now. I just smiled softly and said nothing. Days later, I received a message from someone I didn't expect, Fiona, the former creative lead at Casey's agency. She had quietly defended me in many closed meetings, but had never spoken up before. Her message was short. Cindy, they're about to sell the agency. Casey can't keep control anymore. I read it over and over, my hand resting on the table, feeling neither joy nor sadness. It was simply another piece of the puzzle falling into place. But the biggest surprise came that Monday morning. Claritin sent an email asking SoulSync to lead a campaign centered on authentic brand values, designed as an ongoing emotional storytelling series. Attached was a video clip, an old one featuring Casey, presenting ideas that were nearly 80% identical to a document I had written and left behind before resigning. A document never credited to me. Claritin's message was direct. Cindy, is this your intellectual property or your former agency's? I sat quietly in front of the screen, fingers resting on the keyboard without typing a word, for the first time. I fully understood that, even without trying to retaliate, the truth finds its way to the surface, and this time, it chose the perfect moment to speak. I used to think that a triumphant comeback would arrive with applause, under spotlights, surrounded by instant recognition. But in truth, it came on a foggy morning as I sat at my laptop, quietly drafting a reply to Claritin, my tone calm, attaching the necessary proof. I made no accusations and offered no long explanations. I simply included the original document, written by my own hand 2 years ago, with clearly dated versions, archived files, and each design element intact. I hadn't saved them out of calculation, but because I had valued that work too deeply to ever delete any part of it. At the end of my email, I wrote, I do not need to be credited, but I need the truth to be made clear. Not long after, Claritin responded, they terminated their entire contract with Brennan & Co. and publicly issued an apology to SoulSync regarding the intellectual property dispute. I received a phone call from one of their senior representatives, his voice heavy with discomfort, but I reassured him I would not sue, nor pursue any further action. I wasn't looking for noise. What I needed had arrived, quiet but heavy enough to make those responsible bow their heads without being asked. The matter spread quickly within the industry. Several niche blogs shared the story, names withheld, but clear enough for insiders to understand who was who. Then I received an email from Casey, just one line. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't reply, not out of bitterness, but because there was nothing left to say. Some relationships, once broken, are better left in silence. Niles asked if I wanted to use the media attention to scale SoulSync, maybe pitch to investors or expand partnerships. I took a long time to decide. I knew that if I wanted to keep things small and safe, I could decline and keep writing for brands at my own pace. But part of me also knew that if I didn't step forward now, everything I had endured would only remain a well-told story. So I agreed to meet with Morrison Partners, a group of investors who had built their success in media and digital content. The meeting took place on the 32nd floor of a tower in West Loop. I walked into the boardroom feeling unexpectedly at ease. Without the need to perform like I used to, they didn't ask much about growth metrics. Instead, they wanted to understand how I envisioned SoulSync in the next 3 years. I told them honestly that I wasn't interested in building a content factory chasing clicks and shares. I wanted to create a platform that helped brands tell their stories in ways that were not flashy, but honest and deep. I spoke about how we helped a perfume brand reconnect with users through memory, and how we worked with a small bookstore to turn their pages into vivid emotions. Finally, I said I wasn't looking for loud partnerships, but for allies who understood that emotional marketing wasn't a passing trend, but a long road. They didn't give an answer right away, but before leaving, one of them placed a hand on the briefing document and said, "We've met many who are great at branding, but very few who understand what real value means." That night, I came home and replayed the recording of SoulSync's first pitch. My voice had trembled then, and the content was still raw. But I heard something important in it, the sound of belief being rebuilt piece by piece. I knew this was the real turning point in my journey. Not because I had won, but because I no longer felt like I was being pushed along by anything. I stood exactly where I had chosen to be, and the most unexpected thing came from my mother. One morning, she placed a copy of the local paper on the table. Page 2 featured an article about a woman who started a creative platform from her childhood bedroom and led it to become a leader in Chicago's content industry. She said nothing, just poured me a cup of tea, and her eyes no longer held doubt. I picked up the paper, saw my name printed in bold black font, and realized that this time, I didn't need anyone else to guide the way. The next morning, I arrived at SoulSync's new office, a modest space on the 3rd floor of a creative hub in Pilsen. My team was already there, each holding a cup of coffee and chatting casually. They had no idea what I was about to announce. I stood in the middle of the room, sunlight spilling through the tall windows onto the wooden meeting table, and said, "We're going to expand SoulSync, not by doing more, but by doing deeper. Every brand that comes to us must feel like this is the only place they are truly heard." No one clapped, but I saw in their eyes a unity louder than any applause. That night, back home, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker across the river. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Morrison Partners. The subject line contained just one word: welcome. I didn't need to open it to know that I was ready for a new chapter, one where I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I only needed to live by the values I had carried through the entire journey. I used to think that success meant seeing my name in the headlines, being cited as an example worth following. But in truth, the real feeling of a powerful comeback doesn't come wrapped in glamour. It comes on a quiet Monday morning when I arrive at the office early, start the coffee machine, open the window to let in the first light of day, and hear the footsteps of teammates I trust walking in. Their eyes not looking at me as a boss, but as someone standing beside them. We didn't need to say much, because everyone understood that today marked the launch of Claritin's new campaign, the biggest project SoulSync had ever taken on. I remember clearly the moment the first video went live. The soft piano guiding a story about scent and childhood memory. Every scene crafted with true emotion, not market formulas. The first comment under the video simply read, "Finally, a campaign that makes me feel seen." I didn't reply, but I read it over and over, reminding myself why I started over in the first place. A few weeks later, Claritin announced their campaign results. Brand recall increased by 40%. Revenue had finally risen after years of stagnation. And most importantly, the number of people sharing the content was 3 times higher than expected. A respected industry magazine published a breakdown, calling it a clear testament to the power of emotional marketing. And this time, my name appeared at the end of the piece as the strategic lead. It wasn't flashy or exaggerated, just a simple line, but enough to assure me that things were moving in the right direction. I hadn't thought about Casey, but then someone sent me a link to Brennan & Co.'s old website. The homepage had changed. The staff section listed only 2 people. The About page was brief and no longer mentioned any clients. It seemed they had sold off most of the company's shares, kept the name, but lost its identity. I didn't feel satisfied, nor did I feel sorrow. I only saw the price of building a career on the backs of others. Casey wasn't exposed or ruined, but what she lost couldn't be measured in contracts. She lost trust. She lost the team that once stood behind her with conviction, and I knew that even if she tried to rebuild, the foundation would never be solid again. I continued my work as usual, arriving before everyone else, hosting weekly reviews where I personally wrote feedback for each junior team member. I never wanted to become another Casey, someone in charge but blind to the quiet efforts that held the soul of the project together. Within 2 months, SoulSync was invited to collaborate with 3 other major brands, not because of our budget, but because they believed in the way we told stories. I remember one evening as I walked home, Fiona called. She told me Casey had just resigned entirely. No one knew why, but what made me stop walking was her final sentence. She truly believed in you once, but in the end, she chose the wrong way to hold on to her place. I didn't say much, just thanked her. I knew each of us makes our own choices, and if given the chance to go back, Casey might still do it the same way. I wouldn't. A few months later, SoulSync hosted a small gathering for those who had been with us since the beginning. There was no stage, no cameras, just a cozy room filled with cake and coffee. I stood in the center without giving a speech, simply raised my glass and smiled. My mother showed up late, wearing an old coat and carrying a bag of homemade rice crackers. As the event wound down, she approached me, touched my shoulder gently, and said, "I didn't understand you before, but I've read every article with your name on it. I don't know how much pain you went through, but I can see now that you're living true." I looked at her and didn't need to respond. She didn't know that sentence meant more to me than any $1 million contract. I moved into a small apartment near Lake Michigan, where each morning I could hear the waves striking the shore. I still kept the old coffee cup I used back at my mother's house, now sitting in the corner of my desk as a quiet reminder. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need anyone to lose. I only needed a space where I could be fully myself, not hiding in someone else's shadow, not raising my voice just to be noticed. Someone once asked me, "Cindy, do you regret not speaking up sooner?" I just smiled. Sometimes, silence isn't surrender. It's waiting for the right moment to let the truth reveal itself. I didn't need to shout. I only needed to do what was right. The results were strong enough to answer every rumor. Now, When someone tells me they were betrayed, pushed out of something they helped build, I don't tell them to be strong or to forgive. I just ask one question: what do you truly want? Because I believe that when someone knows the answer to that, they'll find their own way forward, not by being bitter, not by winning through someone else's defeat, but by walking steadily in the direction of their own true values. And if I could say anything after all of this, it would be one question for you reading these words now. In a world where the kind ones are often pushed aside, have you ever chosen to rise, not for revenge, but simply to remind yourself that you were never wrong to begin with,